Welcome to Speed Reads. Untrue. Learn how monogamy in women is more nurture than nature. How many times have you heard women described as demure when it comes to sex? Or seen women judged for being sexually free? The idea that women who are bold and sexually unrestrained are somehow abnormal has been around for so long that many accept it as fact. As a result, our culture sees monogamous women as simply what nature intended, recoiling when women dare to step out on their partners. But the truth is, the concept of monogamy in women was created by society. Looking to our early ancestors and lessons learned from female primate behavior, this summary presents proof of women naturally relishing lots of sex, with lots of partners, and explain how society has clamped down on their sexual desires and autonomy. In this summary, you'll learn what happened when a researcher gave some monkeys room to roam, what size has to do with monogamy, and how a piece of farming equipment changed women's fate. Women aren't inherently more monogamous than men, and they're just as likely to cheat. In movies, TV series, and real life, there's a phrase that often comes up when men cheat: that's just what men do. A friend or family member might say this, or someone relishing the latest gossip. These people, and society at large, believe that being unfaithful is something men are inclined to do. And women? As far as society is concerned, they're naturally monogamous. So, while news of infidelity generally sets tongues wagging, when the guilty party is a woman it's seen as more scandalous. The key message in this summary is, women aren't inherently more monogamous than men, and they're just as likely to cheat. If women are wired for monogamy, then their sex drives should skyrocket, or, at the very least, stay the same when they have long-term partners, right? Well, this is far from the case. Several studies show that women's sexual desire takes a hit in long-term relationships. In 2017, a survey on sexual lifestyles and attitudes published in the British Medical Journal revealed that women living with their partners, or who'd been in relationships for longer than a year, are twice as likely as men to lose interest in sex. And they don't only lose their sex drives in monogamous relationships. Research shows that women do something about it and cheat as often as men do. A 1993 study at the University of Cambridge, England, found that men and women were practically on par when it came to cheating. Almost 20 years later, an online survey by the Kinsey Institute for Research in Sex, Gender, and Reproduction revealed similar results. When it comes to women's sexuality, the idea that cheating is unusual for women isn't the only thing we've been misled about. Another common belief is that women cheat because they want an emotional connection, not sexual pleasure. Ashley Madison, the dating website for people who are married or in relationships, helps debunk this idea. When sociologist and academic Dr. Alicia Walker interviewed women using the website, she learned that they were specifically looking for sexual partners, not new romances or companions. The women were otherwise happy, although sexless, in their current relationships. This would shock the likes of Charles Darwin and English gynecologist William Acton, who thought women weren't very sexual and that those with high sex drives were abnormal. But, as we'll find out later in this speed read summary, the human body suggests otherwise. The anatomy of female and male bodies suggests that women were designed to seek out pleasure from multiple partners. Imagine you're checking out a top-of-the-line phone in a store. You notice it's got an impressive camera with all the latest features, and you ask the assistant for more information on the camera. But, surprisingly, he insists the phone isn't really made for taking pictures. It might sound like a strange leap, but when it comes to the human body and women's sexuality, that fancy phone is a pretty good example. Why is that? Because the female body is designed for intense and repeated sexual pleasure, and yet it's been suggested that women are passive and not as sexual as men. The key message here is, the anatomy of female and male bodies suggests that women were designed to seek out pleasure from multiple partners. For starters, the clitoris is far more sensitive than the penis, with over 8,000 nerve endings in just its tip. Women also tend to stay aroused longer and, unlike men, can have multiple orgasms within a short space of time, and with very little additional effort. But there's a catch. Women take a lot longer to climax, up to 20 minutes on average, compared to 8 to 10 minutes for men. Because women's orgasms are much harder to reach, the author suggests that this might push them to seek out multiple partners in order to get their fix. It's not just women's immense capacity for pleasure that points to monogamy being far from natural. There's also evidence in the cervix, which filters and analyzes sperm to literally separate the weak from the strong. The author asserts that this would only be necessary if women had sex with a variety of men. If you need more convincing, look no further than the male body. Here, size matters, and not for the reasons you might think. You probably don't know this, but male gorillas have relatively small testicles compared to their body size. The author suggests that this is because they live in harems and don't have to compete with other males. So, a little bit of sperm goes a long way in terms of getting a female pregnant. Human males, on the other hand, have larger testicles, similar to male bonobos and chimps whose female counterparts are very promiscuous. Larger testicles produce more sperm, which is an advantage when the sperm has to compete with another man's once it enters the vaginal canal. And just in case sheer numbers don't do the trick, men release a spermicide of sorts in the last spurts of ejaculation, supposedly to kill off any rival sperm that may follow them. Women are more sexually fluid and adventurous than men, and they're inclined to seek different forms of pleasure. So far, we've heard how the features of human bodies just don't line up with the idea of women having sex with the same partner over and over again. But there's another thing about women that hints that monogamy might be a struggle for them. The key message here is, women are more sexually fluid and adventurous than men, and they're inclined to seek different forms of pleasure. When Dr. Lisa Diamond, a professor of psychology and gender studies at the University of Utah, ran a 20-year-long study with a group of women, she discovered something interesting. Their sexual orientation didn't restrict who they were attracted to. For example, straight women in the study found themselves sexually attracted to other women, and even acted on their attractions. Miles away from this study, Dr. Meredith Chivers, founder of the Sexuality and Gender Laboratory at Queen's University in Canada, found that straight women watching porn were aroused by couplings of men and women, women and women, and even men with men. Their male counterparts, on the other hand, had the strongest responses to heterosexual and lesbian couples. According to the author, this suggests that women are a lot more sexually fluid. Sexual fluidity in women doesn't only show up in research labs. There are, in fact, communities of women across the world who openly make the most of it. In 2014, London-based Genevieve Lejeune started the Skirt Club to give straight and bi-curious women a chance to explore their girl-on-girl fantasies. Today, there are Skirt Club events in 12 cities including New York, Sydney, Tokyo, and Vienna. Beyond these glamorous sex parties, in the small southern African country of Lesotho, there's a tradition of heterosexual married women having long-term female friends who are also sexual partners. Across the Atlantic in Suriname, the word Maddie refers to women who have both male and female sexual partners, sometimes at the same time. From research centers to London nightclubs to traditions on opposite sides of the world, there's a lot of evidence that women aren't necessarily satisfied with just one partner. But there are also clues outside our species, and we'll learn more about this in the following summary. It turns out, and this is the key message here, our closest non-human relatives aren't monogamous. If you've spent any time watching the National Geographic or Discovery channels, you may have seen similarities between primate and human behaviors. In fact, studying our not-so-distant cousins has long been established as a good way to learn more about ourselves. This is true even in the case of sex and monogamy. It turns out, and this is the key message here, our closest non-human relatives aren't monogamous. While observing rhesus macaque monkeys, with whom we share about 93% of our DNA, Dr. Kim Wallen, a psychologist and neuroendocrinologist at Yerkes National Primate Research Center at Emory University, learned that female monkeys were highly sexual when given the chance. And they craved variety. Usually, male and female monkeys were caged together, and males initiated sex with females who passively obliged. Interestingly enough, the behavior of the female monkeys was used as proof that the female species wasn't as interested in sex. But when placed in much bigger enclosures where sex wasn't readily available to them, indifference turned to excitement, and the female monkeys roamed around actively seeking and demanding sex. Their enthusiasm dwindled after a few years of mating with the same males, but when new males were introduced to the enclosure, the females were once again incredibly horny. Bonobos are another example. These monkeys are even more closely related to us than rhesus macaques. In fact, we share almost 99% of our DNA with them. And these primates have a reputation for being extremely and indiscriminately sexual. Bonobos of both sexes are known to mate multiple times a day with a variety of partners, and they don't seem to care if their partners are of the opposite sex or not. If all of this evidence implies that humans are far from naturally monogamous, how did we end up in a world where women are thought of as passive, demure, and indifferent to sex? We'll delve into this in the summary. The idea that women are monogamous came with the rise of agriculture and the focus on property. History books tell us that a number of changes and revolutions are behind the progress we've made as humans. But the ideas and new ways of life that change can bring aren't always positive for everyone. If you've ever wondered where monogamy came from, look back a few thousand years to when our ancestors shifted their nomadic way of living to what it resembles today. The key message here is, the idea that women are monogamous came with the rise of agriculture and the focus on property. Back when our ancestors were hunter-gatherers, moving from one place to another in search of wild plants and animals to eat, monogamous relationships were nowhere to be seen. Instead, anthropologists believed that men and women lived in loose communities, had sex with multiple partners within the community, and raised children collectively. But this all changed when roaming around for food was replaced by farming. Our ancestors settled down in villages and more fixed communities where they started growing their own food. And it was the invention of the plow that ushered in new gender roles. Due to the strength required to pull the new machinery, men were in charge of farming food, while the women were left to take care of the children and home. Because women couldn't contribute as much to producing food and sustaining the community, they were valued less than men. Research shows that this idea hasn't changed much in the time since. In fact, a 2013 study by economists from UCLA and Harvard revealed that societies with a history of plow agriculture have fewer women taking part in work in politics, and strong gender-biased beliefs. For example, people in these areas agreed with the idea that men make better leaders and are more deserving of employment. But, in regions where plows weren't necessary for farming, women have better status and are more involved in the workforce and in society overall. Once a culture of farming was in place, land, water, and other resources became more valuable. It was through this emphasis on tangible resources that the concepts of property and, as a result, inheritance came about. And with them came the risk of leaving property to illegitimate children if a woman was unfaithful. The author points out that moral beliefs, literature, and laws warned against women's infidelity, particularly as it related to offspring and inheritance. Consider ancient Greece, where citizenship couldn't be passed down to illegitimate children. As a result, married women were discouraged from committing adultery in especially harsh ways, as we'll discover in the next summary. Punishment and ideas of respectability enforce monogamy and discourage women from expressing their sexuality. As a child, do you remember being told you'd be punished for certain things? Maybe binging on candy meant no candy at all for a month, or staying out past curfew got you grounded for 2 weeks. No matter how tempted you were, the idea of being punished likely stopped you from doing what you wanted. The same can be said when it comes to women and their sexuality. The key message here is, punishment and ideas of respectability enforce monogamy and discourage women from expressing their sexuality. Let's look into why this is. Historically, adulterous women were punished more severely than men. In ancient Greece, for example, women caught cheating had to wear a see-through tunic and stand in public for days, or they were paraded through the streets with their lovers. Today, women in Western society may not be as publicly humiliated, but they still have a lot more to lose than men if they dare to be unfaithful. It turns out that unfaithful women are more likely to be divorced than unfaithful men. In 2000, a review of the Registrar General on Marriages, Divorces, and Adoptions in England and Wales found that 29% of divorced men cited adultery as the reason, compared to 21% of divorced women. And divorce comes with significant changes, including financial loss, which tends to be worse for women. A 2008 study by Professor Stephen Jenkins indicated that 27% of divorced women fell into poverty. That's 3 times more than divorced men. If poverty seems like an unfair punishment for rejecting monogamy, then consider the more complicated consequences that African American women face if they dare to express their sexuality. African American women have historically been hypersexualized by the media and in American society. Within their communities, they're pressured to be models of respectability and to avoid doing anything that could be seen to confirm the stereotype of black women being overly sexual. Outside their communities, the women are often disrespected and treated as if they are inherently wild. The author learned this when she interviewed a few women about online dating. The women explained that white men, often assuming they were always up for sex, would send them messages about BDSM and anal sex right off the bat. So, when non-monogamy comes with so many risks, how accurate is it to believe that monogamy is natural for women? As far as the author is concerned, not accurate at all. Final summary. The key message in this summary, the concept of one woman and one man in a relationship, came about when early humans established villages and started hoarding property. In the time since, women's sexuality and sexual experiences have been suppressed and policed, even though their bodies have the capacity to experience more and more forms of pleasure than men. Only when women have nothing to lose, financially and socially, are they free to indulge their sexual desires.